Pre-rational morality is vigorous because it is sincere. Actual interests, rooted habits, appreciations, the opposite of which is inconceivable and contrary to the current use of language, are embodied in special precepts, or they flare up themselves in impassioned judgments. It's hardly too much to say, indeed, that pre-rational morality is morality proper. Rational ethics, in comparison, seems a kind of politics or wisdom, while post-rational systems are essentially religions. If we thus identify morality with pre-rational standards, we may agree, also, that morality is no science in itself, though it may become, like other matters, a subject for the science of anthropology. Hume, who had never come to close quarters with any rational or post-rational ideal, could say with perfect truth that morality was not founded on reason. Instinct is of course not founded on reason, but vice versa. And the maxims enforced by tradition or conscience are unmistakably founded on instinct. They might, it is true, become materials for reason if they were intelligibly accepted, compared, and controlled. But such a possibility reverses partisan and spasmodic methods which Hume and most other professed moralists associate with ethics. Hume's own treatise on morals, it need hardly be said, are pure psychology. It would have seemed to him conceited, perhaps, to inquire what ought really to be done. He limited himself to asking what men tended to think about their doings. The chief expression of rational ethics, which a man in Hume's world would have come upon, lay in the Platonic and Aristotelian ranks, but these were not then particularly studied, nor vitally understood. The chief illustration of post-rational morality that could have fallen under his eyes, the Catholic religion, he would never have thought of as a philosophy of life, but merely as a combination of superstition and policy, well adapted to the lying and lascivious habits of Mediterranean peoples. Under such circumstances, ethics could not be thought of as a science, and whatever gradual definition of the ideal, whatever prescription of what ought to be and to be done, found a place in the thoughts of such philosophers, formed a part of their politics or religion, and not of their reasoned knowledge. There is, however, a dialectic of the will, and that is the science which, for want of a better name, we must call ethics or moral philosophy. The interweaving of this logic or practice with various natural sciences that have man or society for their theme leads to much confusion in terminology and point of view. Is the good, we may ask, what anybody calls good at the moment, or what anybody calls good on reflection, or what all men agree to call good, or what God calls good, no matter what all mankind may think about it? Or is true good something that perhaps nobody calls good, nor knows of, something with no other characteristic or relation except that it is simply good? Various questions are involved in such perplexing alternatives. Some are physical questions, and others dialectical. Why anyone values anything at all, or anything in particular, is a question of physics. It asks for the causes of interest, judgment, and desire. To esteem a thing good is to express certain affinities between that thing and the speaker, and if this is done with self-knowledge and with knowledge of the thing, so that the felt affinity is a real one, the judgment is invulnerable, it cannot be asked to rescind itself. Thus, if a man said hemlock was good to drink, you might say he was mistaken, but if he explained that he meant good to drink in committing suicide, there would be nothing pertinent left to say. For to deduce that to commit suicide is not good would be impertinent. To establish that, we should have to go back and ask him if he valued anything, life, parents, country, knowledge, reputation. And if he said no and was sincere, our mouths would be effectually stopped. That is, unless we took to declamation. But we might very well turn to the bystanders and explain what sort of blood and training this man possessed, and what had happened among the cells and fibers of his brain to make him reason after that fashion. The causes of morality, good or bad, are physical, seeing that they are causes. The science of ethics, however, has something to do with causes, not in that it need deny or ignore them, but in that it is their fruit, and begins where they end. Incense rises from burning coals, but it is itself no conflagration, and will produce none. What ethics asks is not why a thing is called good, but whether it is good or not, whether it is right or not so to esteem it. Goodness, in this ideal sense, is not a matter of opinion, but of nature. For intent is at work, life is in active operation, and the question is whether the thing or situation responds to that intent. So if I ask, is 4 really twice 2? The answer is not that most people say so, but that, in saying so, I am not misunderstanding myself. To judge whether things are really good, intent must be made to speak. And if this intent may itself be judged later, what happens by virtue of other intents, comparing the first with their own direction. Hence good, when once the moral or dialectical attitude has been assumed, means not what is called good, but what is so. That is, what ought to be called good. For intent, beneath which there is no moral judgment, sets up its own standard. An ideal of science begins on that basis, and cannot go behind it to ask why the obvious good is good at all. Naturally, there is a reason, but not a moral one, for it lies in the physical habit and necessity of things. The reason is simply the propulsive essence of animals and of the universal flux, which renders forms possible but unstable, neither helpful or hurtful to one another. That nature should have this constitution or intent, this direction, is not a good in itself. It is esteemed good or bad as the intent that speaks finds in that situation a support or an obstacle to its ideal. As a matter of fact, nature and the very existence of life cannot be thought wholly evil, since no intent is wholly at war with its conditions, nor can nature and life be sincerely regarded as wholly good, since no moral intent stops at the facts, nor does the universal flux, which infinitely outflows any actual synthesis, altogether support any intent it may generate. Philosophers would do a great discourtesy to estimation if they sought to justify it. It is all other acts that need justification by this one. The first philosophers were accordingly sages. They were statesmen and poets who knew the world and cast a speculative glance at the heavens, the better to understand the conditions and limits of human happiness. Before their day, too, wisdom has spoken in proverbs. It is better, every adage began, better this than that. Images or symbols, mythical or homely events, of course, furnish subjects and provocations for these judgments, but the residuum of all observation was a settled estimation of things, a direction chosen in thought and life because it was better. Such was philosophy in the beginning, and such is philosophy still. To one brought up in a sophisticated society, or in particular, under an ethical religion, Morality seems at first an external command, a chilling and arbitrary set of requirements and prohibitions, which the young heart, if it trusted itself, would not reckon a penny's worth. But while this rebellion is brewing in the secret conclave of the passions themselves are prescribing a code. They are inventing gallantry and kindness and honor. They are discovering friendship and paternity. With maturity comes recognition that the authorized precepts of morality were essentially not arbitrary, that they expressed the genuine aims and interests of a practiced will, that their alleged alien and supernatural basis, which if real, would have deprived them of all moral authority, was but a mythical cover for their forgotten natural springs. Virtue is then seen to be admirable, essentially, not merely by conventional imputation. If traditional morality has much in it that is out of proportion, much that is unintelligent and inert, nevertheless, it represents on the whole the verdict of reason. It speaks for a typical human will, chastened by a typical human experience. Gnomic wisdom, however, is notoriously polychrome, and proverbs depend for the truth entirely on the occasion they are applied to. Almost every wise saying has an opposite one, no less wise, to balance it, so that a man rich in such lore, like Sancho Panza, can always find a veritable maxim to fortify the view he happens to be taking. In respect to foresight, for instance, we are told, make hay while the sun shines. A stitch in time saves nine. Honesty is the best policy. Murder will out. Woe unto you, ye hypocrites. Watch and pray. Seek salvation with fear and trembling. Respice finem. But, on the same authorities, exactly, we have opposite maxims. Inspired by a feeling that moral prudence is fallible, that life is shorter than policy, and that only the present is real. For we hear, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Carpe diem, ars longa, vita brevis. Be not righteous overmuch. Enough for the day is the evil thereof. Behold the lilies of the field. Judge not, that you be not judged. Mind your own business, and it takes all sorts of men to make a world. So when some particularly shocking thing happens, one man says, Cherchez la femme, and another says, Great is Allah. That these maxims should be so various and partial is quite intelligible when we consider how they spring up. Every man in moral reflection is animated by his own intent. He has something in view which he prizes, he knows not why, and which wears to him the essential and unquestionable character of a good. With this standard before his eyes, he observes easily, for love and hope are extraordinarily keen-sighted. What in action, or in circumstances, forwards his purpose, and what thwarts it. And at once the maxim comes, very likely in the language of the particular instance before him. Now the interests that speak in a man are different at different times, and the outer facts or measures which in one case promote that interest may, where other, less obvious conditions have changed, altogether defeat it. Hence all sorts of precepts looking to all sorts of results. Prescriptions of this nature differ enormously in value, for they differ enormously in scope. By chance, or through the insensible operation of experience leading up to some outburst of genius, intuitive maxims may be so central, so expressive of ultimate aims, so representative, of all aims in fusion, that they merely anticipate what moral science would have come to if it had existed. This happens much, as in physics, ultimate truths may be divined by poets long before they are discovered by investigators. The vivida vis animi taking the place of much recorded experience, because much unrecorded experience has secretly fed it. Such, for instance, is the central maxim of Christianity: love thy neighbor as thyself. On the other hand, what is usual in intuitive codes is a mixture of some elementary precepts necessary to any society, with others representing local traditions or ancient rites. Thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt keep holy the Sabbath day, figure side by side in the Decalogue. When Antigone, in her sublimest exaltation, defies human enactments and appeals to laws which are not of today nor yesterday, no man knowing whence they have arisen, she mixes various types of obligation in a most instructive fashion. For her superstitious horror of leaving a body unburied, something decidedly of yesterday, gives poignancy in her mind to natural affection for her brother, something indeed universal, yet having a well-known origin. The passionate assertion of right is here, in consequence, more dramatic than spiritual, and even its dramatic force has suffered somewhat by the change of ruling ideals. The disarray of intuitive ethics is made painfully clear in the conflicts which it involves, when it has fostered two incompatible growths in two centers which lie near enough to each other to come into physical collision. Such ethics has nothing to offer in the presence of discord except an appeal to force and to ultimate physical sanctions. It can instigate, but cannot resolve, the battle of nations and the battle of religions. Precisely the same zeal, the same patriotism, the same readiness for martyrdom fires adherents to rival societies, and fires them especially in view of the fact that the adversary is no less uncompromising and fierce. It might seem idle, if not cruel and malicious, to wish to substitute one historical allegiance for another when both are equally arbitrary, and the existing one is the more congenial to those born under it. But to feel this aggression to be criminal demands some degree of imagination and justice, and sectaries would not be sectaries if they possessed it. Truly religious minds, while eager, perhaps, to extirpate every religion but their own, often rise above national jealousies, for spirituality is universal, whatever churches may be. Similarly, politicians often understand very well the religious situation, and of late it has become again the general practice among prudent governments to do as the Romans did in their conquests, and to leave people free to exercise what religion they have without pestering them with a foreign one. On the other hand, the same politicians are the avowed agents of a quite patent iniquity for what is their ideal, to substitute their own language, commerce, soldiers, and tax gatherers for the tax gatherers, soldiers, commerce, and language of their neighbors. In no means is thought illegitimate, be it fraud in policy or bloodshed in war, to secure this absolutely nugatory end. Is not one country as much a country as another? Is it not as dear to its inhabitants? What then is gained by oppressing its genius, or by seeking to destroy it altogether? Here are two flagrant instances where pre-rational morality defeats the ends of morality. Viewed from within, each religious or national fanaticism stands for a good, but in its outward operation it produces and becomes an evil. It is possible, no doubt, that its agents are really so far apart in nature and ideals that, like men and mosquitoes, they can stand in physical relations only, and if they meet, can meet only to poison or to crush one another. More probably, however, humanity in them is no merely nominal essence. It is definable ideally, as essences are defined by a particularly identical function and intent. In that case, by studying their own nature, they could rise above their mutual opposition, and feel that, in their fanaticism, they were taking too contracted a view of their own souls, and were hardly doing justice to themselves when they did such great injustice to others. How pre-rational morality may approach the goal and miss it is well illustrated in the history of Hellenism. Greek morals may be said to have been inspired by two pre-rational sentiments: a naturalistic religion and a local patriotism. Could Plato have succeeded in making that religion moral, or Alexander in universalizing that patriotism, perhaps Greece might have been saved, and we might all be now at a very different level of civilization. Both Plato and Alexander failed, in spite of the immense and lasting influence of their work, for in both cases the after effects were spurious, and the new spirit was smothered in the dull substances it strove to vivify. Greek myth was an exuberant assertion of the rights of life in the universe. Existence could not but be joyful and immortal if it had once found in land, sea, or air a form congruous with that element. Such congruity would render a being stable, efficient, beautiful. You achieve a perfection grounded in skillful practice and in a thorough rejection of whatever was irrelevant. These things the Greeks call virtue. The gods were perfect models of this kind of excellence. For of course, the amours of Zeus and Hermes' trickery were, in their hardy fashion, splendid manifestations of energy. This natural divine virtue carried no sense of responsibility with it, but it could not fail to diffuse benefit because it radiated happiness and beauty. The worshipper, by invoking those brave inhabitants of the cosmos, felt he might more easily attain a corresponding beauty and happiness in his paternal city. The source of myth had been a genial sympathy with nature. The observer, at ease himself, multiplied ideally the potentialities of his being. But he went farther in imagining what life might yield abroad, free from every trammel and necessity, than in deepening his sense of what life was in himself and of what it ought to be. This moral reflection, absent from mythology, was supplied by politics. The family and state had a sober, antique religion of their own. This hereditary piety, together with the laws, prescribed the citizens' education, customs, and duties. The city drew its walls close about the heart, and while it fostered friendship and reason with them, without it looked too little of war. A splendid physical and moral discipline was established to serve a suicidal egoism. The city committed its crimes, and the individual indulged his vices of conduct and estimation, hardly rebuked by philosophy, and quite unrebuked by religion. Nevertheless, religion and philosophy existed, together with the incomparable literature and art, and an unrivaled measure and simplicity in living. The liberal fancy and strict civic regimen, starting with different partial motives and blind purposes, combined by good fortune into an almost rational life. It was inevitable, however, when only an irrational tradition supported the state that kept it so weak amid a world of enemies, that this state should succumb, not to speak of the mean, the license in life, and the spirit of mockery that inwardly infested it. The mist, too, faded, that had expressed a fleeting moment of poetic insight, as patriotism had expressed a fleeting moment of unanimous effort. But what force could sustain such accidental harmonies? The patriotism soon lost its power to inspire sacrifice, and the myth its power to inspire wonder, so that the relics of that singular civilization were scattered almost at once in the general flood of the world. The Greek ideal has fascinated many men in all ages, who have sometimes been in a position to set a fashion, so that the world in general has pretended also to admire. But the truth is, Hellas, in leaving so many heirlooms to mankind, has left no constitutional benefit. It has taught the conscience no lesson. We possess a great heritage from Greece, but it is no natural endowment. An artistic renaissance in the 15th century, an historical one in the 19th, have only affected the trappings of society. The movement has come from above. It has not found any response in the people, while Greek morality, in its contents, or in the type of life it prescribes, comes nearer than any other pre-rational experiment to what reason might propose, yet it has been less useful than many other influences in bringing the life of reason about. The Christian and the Muslim, refining the more violent inspiration, have brought us nearer to genuine goodness than the Greek could by his idle example. Classic perfection is a seedless flower, imitatable only by artifice, not reproducible by generation. It is capable of influencing character only through the intellect, the means by which character can be influenced least. It is a detached ideal, responding to no crying and actual demand in the world at large. It never passed to win the right of addressing mankind through a sufficient novitiate of sorrow. The Hebrews, on the contrary, who in comparison with the Greeks had a barbarous idea of happiness, showed far greater moral cohesion under the pressure of adversity. They integrated their purposes into a fanaticism, but they integrated them, and the integrity that resulted became a mighty example. It constituted an ideal of character, not the less awe-inspiring for being merely formal. We need not marvel that abstract commandments should have impressed the world more than concrete ideals. To appreciate an ideal, to love and serve it in the full light of science and reason, would require a high intelligence, and, what is rarer still, noble affinities and renunciations, which are not to be looked for in an undisciplined people. But to feel the truth and authority of an abstract maxim, as, for instance, do right and shame the devil, a maxim applicable to experience on any plane, nothing is needed but a sound wit and common honesty. Men know better what is right and wrong than what is ultimately good or evil. Their conscience is more vividly present to them than the fruits which obedience to conscience might bear, so that the logical relation of means to ends, of methods to activities, eludes them altogether. What is the necessary connection between the given end, happiness, and the normal life naturally possessing it, appears to them as a miraculous connection between obedience to God's commands and enjoying of His favor. The evidence of this miracle astonishes them and fills them with zeal. They are strengthened to persevere in righteousness under any stress and misfortune, in the assurance that they are being put to a temporary test, and that the reward promised to virtue will eventually be theirs. As the happiness secured by virtue may be remote, and may demand more virtue to make it appreciable, the mere rationality of a habit gives it no currency in the world, and but little moral glow in the conscience. We should not, therefore, be too much offended at the illusions which play a part in moral integration. Imagination is often more efficacious in reaching the gist and meaning of experience than intelligence can be, just because imagination is less scrupulous and more instinctive. Even physical discoveries, when they come from the fruit of divination, and Columbus had to believe he might sail westward to India before he could actually hit upon America. Reason cannot create itself, and nature, in producing reason, has to feel her way experimentally. Habits and sound systems of education have to arise first and exercise upon individuals an irrational persuasion favorable to rational ends. Organs all exist before they reach their perfect function. The fortunate instincts of a race destined to long life and rationality express themselves in significant poetry before they express themselves in science. The service which Hebrewism has rendered to mankind has been instrumental, as that rendered by Hellenism has been imaginative. Hebrewism has put earnestness and urgency into morality, making it a matter of duty, at once private and universal, rather than what paganism had left it, a mass of local allegiances and legal practices. The Jewish system has, in consequence, a tendency to propaganda and intolerance, a tendency which would not have proved nefarious had this religion always remained true to its moral principle. For morality is coercive, and no man, being autonomous, has the right to do wrong. Conscience, thus reinforced by religious passion, has been able to focus the general abhorrence on certain great scandals. Slavery and sodomy could be practically suppressed among Christians, and drunkenness among Muslims. The Christian principle of charity also owed a part of its force to Hebraic tradition, for the law and the prophets were full of mercy and loving kindness toward the faithful. What Moses had taught his people, Christ and his Hellenizing disciples had the beautiful courage to preach to all mankind. Yet this virtue of charity, on its subtler and more metaphysical side, belongs to the spirit of redemption, to that ascetic and quasi-Buddhistic element in Christianity to which we shall presently revert. The pure Jews can have no part in such insight, because it contradicts the positivism of their religion and character and their ideal of worldly happiness. As the human body is said to change all its substance every 7 years, and yet is the same body, so the Hebraic conscience might change all its tenets in 7 generations and be the same conscience still. Could this abstract moral habit, this transferable earnestness, be enlisted in rational causes, the life of reason would have gained a valuable instrument. Men would possess the single eye and the art so difficult to an ape-like creature with loose moral feelings of acting on principle. Could the vision of an adequate natural ideal fall into a Hebraizing mind, already aching for action and nerved to practical enthusiasm? The ideal vision might become efficacious and be largely realized in practice. The abstract power of self-direction, if enlightened by larger experience and more fertile genius, might give the life of reason public embodiment, such as it has not had since the best days of classic antiquity. Thus the two pre-rational moralities, out of which European civilization has grown, could they be happily superposed, would make a rational polity. The object of human desires, then, until reason has compared and experience has tested them, are a miscellaneous assortment of goods, unstable in themselves and incompatible with one another. It is a happy chance if a tolerable mixture of them recommends itself to a profit, or finds an advantageous acceptance among a group of men. Intuitive morality is adequate while it simply enforces those obvious and universal laws which are indispensable to any society, and which impose themselves everywhere on men under pain of quick extinction, a penalty which many individual and many a nation continually prefers to pay. But when intuitive morality ventures upon speculative ground and tries to guide progress, its magic fails. Ideals are tentative and have to be critically viewed. A moralist who rests in his intuitions may be a good preacher, but hardly deserves the name of philosopher. He cannot find any authority for his maxims, which opposite maxims may not equally invoke. To settle the relative merits of rival authorities and of hostile consciences, it is necessary to appeal to the only real authority, to experience, reason, and human nature in the living man. No other test is conceivable, and no other would be valid, for no good man would ever consent to regard an authority as divine or binding, which essentially contradicted his own conscience. Yet a conscience which is irreflective and incorrigible is too hastily satisfied with itself, not conscientious enough. It needs cultivation by dialectic. It needs to extend all human interests, that principle of synthesis and justice by which conscience itself has arisen. And so soon as the conscience summons its own dicta for revision in the light of experience and of universal sympathy, it is no longer called conscience, but reason. So, too, when the Spirit summons its traditional faiths to subject them to a similar examination, that exercise is not called religion, but philosophy. It is true, in a sense, that philosophy is the purest religion, and reason the ultimate conscience, but so to name them would be misleading. The things commonly called by those names have seldom consented to live at peace with sincere reflection. It has been felt vaguely that reason could not have produced them, and that they might suffer side changes by submitting to it, as if reason could be the ground of anything, or as if everything might not find its consummation in becoming rational.